Art 1. The rain fell in relentless sheets over Berlin's cobbled streets, turning the night into a blur of neon and shadows. Clara Müller, a 28-year-old graphic designer, pulled her coat tighter, her boots splashing through puddles as she hurried toward her apartment in Kreuzberg. It was past midnight, and the city's pulse felt different tonight, slower, heavier, like it was holding its breath. She'd stayed late at a client studio, perfecting a campaign that could land her a promotion. Her phone was dead, her umbrella forgotten at the office, and the streets were emptier than usual. Clara's breath fogged in the cold air as she turned into a narrow alley, a shortcut she'd taken 100 times. The walls were lined with graffiti, vibrant murals dulled by the rain. She didn't notice the figure at first, blending into the shadows like a smudge of ink. But then she heard it, a soft scuff of boots behind her. Her steps faltered, and she glanced over her shoulder. Nothing. Just the rain and the distant hum of a tram. She shook her head, chiding herself for being paranoid. Berlin was safe, wasn't it? But the feeling lingered, a prickling at the base of her neck. She quickened her pace, her keys jingling in her pocket. The alley seemed longer tonight, the streetlights dimmer. Then, a voice cut through the rain, a low, guttural whisper, accented and deliberate. Necesito hacer amor, Clara froze, her heart slamming against her ribs. The words were Spanish, not German, and they felt wrong, invasive, like a blade slipping under her skin. She turned, her eyes scanning the darkness. A man stood 10 feet away, his face half hidden under a hood. No te muevas o te dolerá más, seré rápido, he murmured, stepping closer. Clara's mind raced. Don't move, or it'll hurt more. I'll be quick. The words burnt into her, each syllable laced with menace. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs felt rooted to the ground. The man's eyes glinted under the streetlight, unreadable but intense, like a predator sizing up prey. He was close now, close enough for her to smell the damp wool of his coat and something sharper, cologne, maybe, or sweat. Who are you? She managed, her voice trembling but defiant. The man tilted his head, almost amused, and took another step. Clara's hand fumbled for her keys, gripping them between her fingers like a makeshift weapon. She didn't know if she could fight, but she wasn't going down without trying. The rain stung her eyes, blurring his face, but she saw the faint curve of a smile. You don't need to know, he said, his accent thick but his German clear. Just stay still. Clara bolted. Her boots slipped on the wet cobblestones, but adrenaline pushed her forward. She didn't look back, didn't stare, as she sprinted toward the end of the alley. The streetlights flickered, and her breath came in sharp gasps. She could hear him behind her, his footsteps steady, unhurried, like he knew she couldn't escape. The alley opened onto a main road, and she stumbled into the glare of a passing car's headlights. She waved frantically, but the car didn't stop. She turned into another side street, her lungs burning. The footsteps were closer now, deliberate. Clara ducked behind a dumpster, her heart pounding so loud she was sure he could hear it. She crouched low, clutching her keys, and tried to steady her breathing. The man's silhouette appeared at the mouth of the street, pausing as if savoring the hunt. Clara's mind screamed at her to move, but her body refused. She was trapped, and he knew it. Then, a phone rang. Sharp, yelling, it cut through the rain. The man stopped, pulling a phone from his pocket. He answered in a low voice, speaking rapidly in Spanish. Clara couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent, almost angry. He turned away, pausing, and for a moment, she thought she might have a chance. She edged toward the dumpster's far side, her eyes locked on him. But as she moved, her foot nudged a glass bottle, sending it clinking across the pavement. The man's head snapped toward her. Te dije que no te muevas, he hissed, slipping the phone back into his pocket. I told you not to move. Clara's blood ran cold. She didn't wait to see what he'd do next. She ran again, her legs screaming, her mind a blur of fear and instinct. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to keep moving. The streets of Kreuzberg twisted around her, a maze of bars, kebab shops, and shuttered storefronts. She ducked into another alley, her hands shaking as she fumbled with her keys. Her apartment was close, 2 blocks, maybe 3. If she could just get there, lock the door, call the police. But the footsteps were back, closer now, relentless. She risked a glance over her shoulder and saw him, his hood still up, his pace steady but faster. He wasn't running, but he was gaining. Clara reached her building, her fingers trembling as she jammed the key into the lock. The door clicked open, and she stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind her. She leaned against it, gasping, listening for any sign he was still out there. The rain muffled everything, but she heard it, a soft knock, deliberate, almost polite. Her stomach dropped. He was right outside. Part 2. Clara slid the deadbolt into place, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped her keys. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by that voice, soft and chilling. Abre la puerta, Clara, he said, his tone almost tender. Open the door. She froze. How did he know her name? Her mind scrambled for answers. Had she dropped something in the alley? Her ID, a receipt? Or was this not random at all? She backed away from the door, her eyes darting to her phone on the counter. Dead. She cursed herself for not charging it at the studio. The knock came again, 3 slow taps, and then silence. Clara held her breath, straining to hear anything, footsteps, a voice, anything to tell her he was gone. But the silence was worse, heavy with the promise of something waiting. She crept to the window, peeling back the curtain just enough to peer into the street. The rain had eased, leaving the pavement slick and reflective. No one was there. No hooded figure, no shadow lurking under the street lights. But Clara wasn't fooled. Chet felt his presence, the weight of his gaze. He wasn't gone, not yet. She grabbed a kitchen knife and sank onto the couch, her eyes locked on the door. Her apartment, once a cozy haven of plants and art prints, felt like a cage now. Every creak of the old building made her jump. She tried to piece together what had happened. The man's words, Necesito, hacer, amor, kept looping in her mind, each repetition more sinister than the last. Was he a stranger, or someone she'd crossed paths with before? Berlin was full of transients, artists, and drifters, but this felt personal, targeted. Her thoughts drifted to the past few weeks. She'd noticed small things, her mail tampered with, a strange man lingering outside her favorite cafe, a missed call from an unknown number. She'd brushed them off as city life, but now they felt like breadcrumbs leading to this moment. Clara's job took her to late-night meetings, trendy bars, and client dinners. Had she caught someone's attention? Someone who'd been watching, waiting? The knife trembled in her hand as she stood, pacing the small living room. She needed to call the police, but her landline was disconnected. She'd relied on her mobile for everything. Her laptop was upstairs, but the thought of leaving the room, even for a second, made her skin crawl. She glanced at the door again, half expecting it to burst open. Then, a new sound, a faint scratching, like nails on wood. It was coming from the back door, the one leading to the tiny courtyard she shared with her neighbors. Clara's heart leapt into her throat. She gripped the knife tighter and moved toward the sound, her bare feet silent on the hardwood. The scratching stopped, replaced by a low creak, like someone testing the handle. She pressed herself against the wall, her pulse roaring in her ears. The back door was old, its lock flimsy. She'd meant to replace it but never got around to it. Stupid, she thought, cursing her procrastination. The handle rattled again, more insistently. Clara's mind raced. She could scream, but her neighbors were rarely home, and the walls were thick. She could run upstairs, barricade herself in her bedroom, but that felt like delaying the inevitable. The rattling stopped. Silence again. Clara slid down the wall, her knees weak, the knife still clutched in her hand. She didn't know how long she sat there, listening, waiting. Minutes? Hours? The rain started again, a soft patter against the windows, and she almost convinced herself it was over. Maybe he'd given up. Maybe he'd never been there at all, just a trick of her exhausted mind-distance. But then her laptop pinged from upstairs, a sharp, electronic chime. Clara's breath caught. She hadn't touched it in hours, and it was supposed to be off. She forced herself to her feet, the knife still in her hand, and climbed the stairs, each step creaking under her weight. The hallway was dark, the air colder than it should have been. She reached her bedroom and saw the laptop on her desk, its screen glowing faintly. A message was open on the screen, one she hadn't sent or received. It was in Spanish, the words stark against the white background: No puedes escapar, Clara. Te encontraré. You can't escape. I'll find you. Her stomach churned. Someone had been in her apartment. Someone had touched her things, typed those words. She slammed the laptop shut, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped the knife. She ran back downstairs, checking the locks again, her mind spiraling. How had he gotten in? The windows were closed, the doors locked. She grabbed a chair and wedged it under the front door handle, then did the same for the back. It wouldn't stop him forever, but it might buy her time. She needed to think, to plan. Her eyes fell on her neighbor's spare key, hanging on a hook by the fridge. Frau Weber, the elderly woman next door, was away visiting family, but Clara had access to her apartment for emergencies. It wasn't much, but it was a place to hide, to regroup. She grabbed the key, slipped on her shoes, and opened the back door, peering into the courtyard. The rain had stopped, and the night was still. Too still. She stepped outside, locking the door behind her, and hurried to Frau Weber's back entrance. The key turned smoothly, and she slipped inside, closing the door as quietly as she could. The apartment smelt of lavender and old books, a stark contrast to the terror clawing at her chest. She sank onto the floor, the knife still in her hand, and tried to steady her breathing. Part 3. Frau Weber's apartment was dark, the only light coming from a street lamp filtering through lace curtains. Clara crouched by the window, her eyes scanning the courtyard. Nothing moved, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he was out there, watching, waiting for her to make a mistake. The knife felt heavy in her hand, its blade catching the faint light. She wasn't a fighter, but she'd do whatever it took to survive. Her mind raced through possibilities. The police were her best bet, but she needed a phone. Frau Weber had an old rotary phone in the living room, a relic from another era. Clara crept toward it, her footsteps muffled on the thick carpet. She lifted the receiver, her heart sinking when she heard no dial tone. Dead, just like her mobile. She slammed it down, frustration mixing with fear. She needed a plan. She could try to reach a neighbor, but most of the building's residents were young professionals, often out late or away. The nearest police station was a 10-minute walk, but that meant going back into the streets, where he could be waiting. She thought about the message on her laptop. Te encontraré. He knew her name, her home. This wasn't random. Clara's eyes darted to a photo on Frau Weber's mantel, a faded picture of a young man in a military uniform. It gave her an idea. Frau Weber had mentioned her late husband's hunting gear, stored in the basement. There might be something useful, a flashlight, a tool, maybe even a weapon. The basement door was in the courtyard, shared by the building's tenants. It was risky, but staying put felt riskier. She slipped back into the courtyard, her heart pounding as she unlocked the basement door. The stairs were steep, the air damp and musty. She found a light switch and flicked it on, revealing a cluttered space filled with boxes, old furniture, and cobwebs. She rummaged through shelves, her hands shaking as she pushed aside dusty jars and tools. Then she saw it, a locked metal box with a label in Frau Webers neat handwriting, Jagdausrüstung. Hunting gear. Clara pried it open with a crowbar, her hands slick with sweat. Inside was a hunting knife, a flashlight, and a small pistol, its metal cold and heavy. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the gun. She'd never fired one, didn't even know if it was loaded, but it felt like power, like a chance. She tucked it into her waistband, grabbed the flashlight, and headed back upstairs. As she locked the basement door, a shadow moved in the courtyard. Clara Frotze, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. It caught the edge of a figure, tall, hooded, standing by her back door. Her breath hitched, but she didn't move, didn't make a sound. The figure stepped closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. Then he stopped, tilting his head as if listening. Clara's hand tightened around the pistol. She didn't want to use it, didn't want to cross that line, but she wasn't helpless anymore. The man turned, his face still hidden, and walked toward the alley, disappearing into the shadows. Clara waited, her body trembling, until she was sure he was gone. She ran back to Frau Weber's apartment, barricading the door with a heavy chair. Her mind was clearer now, fueled by adrenaline and the weight of the gun. She needed to get out, to find help, but she couldn't just run blindly. She remembered a 24-hour convenience store 3 blocks away, always staffed, always lit. Tight have a phone, maybe even a security guard. It was her best shot. Clara slipped out the back, keeping to the shadows, the flashlight off to avoid drawing attention. The streets were quiet, the rain a faint drizzle now. She moved quickly, her eyes scanning every corner, every doorway. The store's neon sign glowed in the distance, a beacon of safety. She was almost there, just one more block, when she heard those footsteps again, slow and deliberate. She turned, the pistol in her hand now, her heart pounding but her resolve steady. The man was there, 20 feet away, his hood up, his eyes locked on hers. "Clara," he said, his voice soft but carrying a weight that made her skin crawl. "No tienes que hacer esto. You don't have to do this." "Who are you?" she shouted, her voice stronger than she felt. "What do you want?" He stepped closer, and for the first time, she saw his face clearly, sharp features, dark eyes, a scar running down his cheek. "You know me," he said, his smile cold. "You just don't remember." Clara's mind raced. She didn't know him, did she? But his words stirred something, a faint memory she couldn't place. A client? A stranger from a bar? Her finger tightened on the trigger, but she didn't shoot. Not yet. "Stay back," she warned, her voice steady now. The man raised his hands, almost mockingly, and took another step. "You're not a killer, Clara," he said. "But I am." She didn't wait to hear more. She fired, the sound deafening in the quiet street. The man staggered, clutching his shoulder, but he didn't fall. He laughed, low and guttural, and lunged toward her. Clara ran, the store's lights closer now, her legs burning but her focus razor-sharp. She burst through the door, shouting for help, the clerk's startled face the last thing she saw before the world went black. When she woke, she was in a hospital, the beeping of machines steady and reassuring. A detective sat by her bed, his face kind but serious. The man had been caught, he told her, shot and apprehended outside the store. His name was Javier Ruiz, a drifter with a history of stalking women across Europe. Clara's shot hadn't killed him, but it had stopped him. The detective handed her a photo, one found in Ruiz's pocket. It was her, taken weeks ago outside her office, smiling at someone off camera. Clara's stomach twisted. He'd been watching her for months, maybe longer. The detective didn't know why, didn't know what had drawn him to her, but Clara felt the weight of it, the violation of being seen without knowing. She left Berlin a month later, moving to a small town in Bavaria, far from the city's shadows. The nightmares lingered, the whisper of his voice, "No te muevas o te dolerá más," echoing in her sleep. But she was alive, and she was free. And that, she told herself, was enough. The rain still fell sometimes, soft against her new windows, but Clara didn't flinch anymore. She'd faced the darkness and come out the other side. Not whole, not unbroken, but stronger. And that was a story worth telling.